organisations to bid for the first green free port in Scotland. The team won the bid, and the green port infrastructure will now deliver a pipeline of renewable energy projects, creating more than 15,000 jobs in the Highlands, with a further 10,000 jobs across the UK. Earlier this year, I travelled to the University of Reading to see the fantastic work the Thames Valley Chamber are doing, driving inward investment into the UK creative industries. The Chamber worked in partnership with the Department for Business and Trade to support the university to develop a major film studio and creative media campus, Shinfield Studios. This will be a state-of-the-art facility that will not only attract major Hollywood productions, but create 3,000 new jobs and deliver over £500 million to the economy every year. And last month, I visited a business called Paragraph at our Cambridgeshire Chamber. This is a business that has developed a microchip made of graphene. It is 10,000 times more conductive and uses 1/10 of the energy of a normal chip. World-beating IP, developed by a company that has chosen to grow and invest right here in the UK, despite many offers to move abroad. These are just a handful of examples. I could share thousands more. Every day, we see inspiring examples of firms defying the odds, using their can-do, solution-orientated attitudes to push for prosperity, even when they are up against it. I want to take you back to Newcastle upon Tyne 200 years ago. At that time, the boats used to come down the River Tyne into the city to get unloaded by the merchants. As the boats got bigger, they couldn't get all the way down the river, so the merchants had to travel out of town and unload the boats, which was, of course, costly and inefficient. Now, the reason they couldn't get their boats down the river was because there was a small rocky island in the centre. So the merchants of Newcastle clubbed together and they put their money in a pot. And what did they buy with their money? They bought dynamite. And they blew up the small rocky island so the boats could come all the way down the Tyne and into the city. They saw a problem, they came together, and they fixed it. That is the power of the collective in action. And today, we all need to work together to make the UK the best place to start and grow a business. And we want to grow and scale our community. Whether you are an entrepreneur with a great idea who doesn't know how to get it off the ground, or an international firm looking to invest in the UK, the Chamber of Commerce will help you find the answer wherever you are. As a member of the British Chambers of Commerce, we are part of your community, and you are part of ours. This means there is always someone to call, and someone will always be there with the expertise to tackle your problem. A diverse membership means we can tap into the minds and experiences of a huge range of members, from tech startups to global multinationals. We are for every business. A steady hand with credibility on the big challenges and the convening power to bring business together to find solutions. And so, today, we are calling on businesses of all sizes across all sectors to work with us to tackle 5 of the biggest challenges and opportunities the country is facing right now. The digital revolution, people and work, green innovation, global Britain, and the future of our high streets. Let me start with the digital revolution. Look at the changes being delivered by generative AI. What previously took years is now only taking days or even minutes. We need to be ready for the pace of exponential change. At the Chambers, we're led by one of Britain's true digital pioneers. Our president, Martha Lane Fox, has been at the heart of digital innovation, both as an entrepreneur and a policy shaper. As we move forward into an increasingly digital age, it's vital that we answer the crucial questions that firms are asking. How can we use AI to revolutionize the way we operate? What policies can help us embrace the benefits? And how can we safeguard against the negative consequences and ensure no one is left behind? That's why we urgently need to work in partnership with government to identify the solutions and redesign our future. The second challenge is people and work. We have over 1 million vacancies across our economy. 80% of businesses looking to hire staff are facing real challenges. How are we expected to grow the economy without a real plan to fill these jobs? We can achieve this through long-term investment in local skills improvement plans, already led by the Chamber Network, by taking a pragmatic approach to immigration policy that ensures the shortage occupation list reflects the reality on the ground, and supporting people to get back to work. Third on our agenda is green innovation. As chair of the Advisory Group on Business for the Climate Change Committee, delivering net zero is a goal close to my heart. The UK economy was the first major economy in the world to legislate for a binding target to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And businesses must play a leading role in tackling that shared environmental ambition. The UK is ahead of the curve on green innovation, but with a lack of direction from government, we are seeing the US and the EU moving fast and becoming more attractive places for our businesses. This is a huge opportunity for UK PLC. New global markets for low-carbon products and services will be worth an estimated £1 trillion to the UK by 2030. Let's not turn our back on that. The fourth challenge centres on Britain's place in the global economy. Post-Brexit, the UK is figuring out its economic role in the world. Both exports and inward investment are facing growing competition. But it's a problem we are well placed to solve. Only 10% of UK businesses export. 60% of Chamber members do. And that is because we know how to find opportunities and partners all over the world and give businesses the tools to break into new markets. We are also working to ensure that the UK continues to be a great place to invest, so that when global boards are deciding where to put their money, they see in the UK the conditions, the talent, and the access to finance that makes it one of the best places in the world to grow a business. And finally, the fifth challenge we are taking on is the future of the high street. A bellwether of our British towns and cities, the high street is in a constant state of flux. The continuing rise of online shopping, altered working patterns, and the cost of living crisis have hit our places hard. leaving many shops derelict and creating ghost towns in our communities. We need to bring them back to life. Planning, business rates, and devolution may not be a conversation starter at a dinner party, but they are by far the most important conversations for our chambers. If we want to revive our towns and cities, we, the business community, need to be a leader in this process of change, not a follower, and shape the future of Britain's communities. I began by talking about passion and growth, potential and productivity, products and prosperity, all vital ingredients. And while the UK's present may look uncertain, those who doubt us should remember that it's never a good bet to bet against Britain. Because the history of British business is a great story. It's the strength of local connections, national influence, and global reach. And the everyday stories that deliver extraordinary results. At the British Chambers of Commerce, we exist to give this narrative a voice because we believe in business. Bringing companies together to unite profit and purpose, driving prosperity through the power of the collective, and creating an economy that works for everyone. At the British Chambers of Commerce, we are where business belongs. Thank you. Thank you. And now for our next speaker. So, before turning his hand to politics, he was also a business owner, and in 2005 became an MP for South West Surrey. Since then, he has served and led in numerous departments across government, including Health and Social Care, the Foreign Office, and now the Treasury. I have welcomed the constructive discussions we've had on the challenges facing business and know that we have a shared ambition to maximise economic growth and make the UK the best place to start and grow a business. And I look forward to continuing our positive relationship. So, please join me in welcoming the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt.
Jacket off.
Jacket off,
Love
yes.
It.
Down to
Love
business.
It. Down to business. Shirt sleeves rolled up. Chancellor, it's a great honour to have you here today. We know it's a really busy time, and I think everybody in the room really, really appreciates it. Before we get into some of the more topical issues, one question that I'm very keen to know from you is, what was it like at the start of your job? Because there you are, going about your business, your backbench business, and you get the call from Liz Truss after the mini-budget. What was that like?
It was a bit surreal, Aisha. I mean, I thought I was comfortably consigned to the backbenches and obscurity for the rest of my life, and thoroughly enjoying myself, actually. And I got a text message saying, "This is Liz Truss, please call." And I thought, this is going to be a hoax. And I was actually on a weekend away with my wife in Brussels, and I said, I can't believe these hoaxers who keep thinking I'm going to get caught out. And we went down and had a lovely breakfast downstairs. And finally, I was called by a former special advisor who says, no, I think Liz Truss really is trying to get in touch with you. And so I hesitantly called the number 10 switchboard and said, I think this is a hoax. And they said, no, 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 the Prime Minister does want to speak to you. And so it was a rather surreal moment. But Siobhan mentioned that I was, I come from a business background. I set up and ran my own business for 14 years and before I came into politics. And there is no greater privilege for someone who has been through the hard graft of setting up a business from scratch and going through all those challenges than to be responsible for our economy and for trying to make life easier for other people who go on the same path.
And so even though there had been a lot of turmoil after that mini-budget, was it a really easy decision to make, or did you have to sort of weigh it up? Because, it was a lot to come in and deal with.
There were some immediate decisions which were difficult but quite obvious, because we had to stabilise the markets, and those were the decisions that we took in a few days. The autumn statement that followed was not easy. I mean, I'm a Conservative, and in order to bring down inflation and to restore stability, we had to cut spending and increase taxes. And those are very, very difficult decisions for any Chancellor to take. But I think the result of those difficult decisions is that we are now on a path where not just us, but people like the Bank of England and the markets believe we will bring inflation and interest rates down. And in the end, that's the most important single thing we need to make sure happens.
Now, that is very much part of the promises that the Prime Minister has set out, halving inflation this year and growing the economy. But how confident are you that you can meet those pledges, given that inflation is still quite stubborn and that growth is sluggish? Yes, we were not in recession 0.1, but we want to do better than that.
Well, the independent forecasters say we will meet those targets, but what I would say is there is nothing automatic about bringing down inflation. There is a plan. We're going to stick to it. The Bank of England has their role through monetary policy and interest rates. We support them 150% in that. But we have our role in government. What I do on the fiscal side in terms of tax and spend has an influence. And if markets judge that we are not getting our borrowing under control, they will punish us with higher interest rates. And so I have a very important role. The government has a very important role. What I would say to people who are worried about levels of taxation is I agree with that. We have to get our taxes down, particularly our business taxes down. But the worst tax of all is inflation, because inflation is a tax which you get nothing back for in return, but it eats away at consumers' confidence. It means they spend less on the businesses represented here today, and it deters businesses from investing. And so that has to be the overwhelming priority for this year.
Now, on taxes, we know that particularly for many on your side of politics, a lot of your backbenchers are very upset at the high levels of tax. Particularly with fiscal drag, more people are being pushed into those higher tax brackets, and it's a heavy tax burden at the moment. As we pitch roll towards the general election, and if there is any headroom, are you keen to try and land some tax cuts to stimulate the economy, either towards the end of this year or into next spring?
Well, we aren't in a position to know whether we're going to have any headroom at all, but my priority is to make this, and by the way, I completely agree with what Siobhan said, do not bet against Britain. I think we have got incredible opportunity in this country to be the most dynamic and innovative economy in Europe. And part of that is to have competitive business taxes. And so I made it very clear in the budget that my priority, I've introduced, if you look at the two big challenges facing people in this room, and we've listened very carefully to what people like Siobhan have said, to expand, businesses want to know that they can recruit the staff they need. So we had an entire budget focused on labour supply, of which childcare was the biggest single measure, but there was big measures on, for example, people with disabilities who are much more able to work than they have been in the past because of the ease of working from home, which is a big change. So we've been thinking a lot about labour supply. But the other thing is business investment. and we've introduced full expensing. We're one of only 6 countries in the OECD, that's the advanced economies, 38 countries in total. No other major European country has full expensing. That makes us, in tax terms, the most attractive large European country to invest for capital. And that's something that everyone is saying really matters. They want us to make it easier for them to invest and grow their businesses.
And those, that fully expensing, is that something you'd like to see continued on
Absolutely.
a long-term basis?
I want it to be permanent. We've introduced it for 3 years, but we made it very clear that it is a priority to make it permanent as soon as we can afford to do so. But that means that, in this country, if you make an investment this year, in next year's tax bill, you reduce the taxable amount chargeable for corporation tax by the full 100% of that capital investment. Now, we have lagged France, Germany, and the United States in terms of our business investment for many years, and that feeds through into our productivity, and we need to increase that. And this is one of the ways that we can support additional investment by businesses. It helps all of you grow your businesses and makes it easier to make those capital investments in IT, plant, machinery, all the things that are going to make you more efficient in the future.
Now, another thing that Siobhan mentioned, and I think this is something that a lot of people in the room feel very strongly about, is, of course, the skills in the labour market at the moment. Now, we're expecting some quite high immigration figures, which will, of course, combine legal migration plus refugees, and we don't know the exact figure, but it is expected to be high. Now, the OBR says that much of our growth is dependent on migration, and lots of work visas are being issued to help plug these skills gaps. But there's still a lot of political pushback, even from some members of your cabinet. We've seen this conference as well taking place over the last couple of days. Many people in your party and in the cabinet saying, no, we have got to have lower immigration figures. Where do you stand on this? Many people in this room will say, look, we have got to have migration coming in to fill those labour gaps. Or do you think we should be aiming for much lower figures?
Well, the Brexit decision, whichever side of that debate you were on, was a decision to change our economic model towards being a high-skill and high-wage economy. And I think that's something everyone instinctively supports. And it was a decision to move away from being an economy dependent on unlimited low-skilled migration. So we've got about 1 million vacancies in the economy at the moment, according to the labour supply figures that came out yesterday. And we have about 7 million adults of working age who are not in work. So what I was doing in the budget was going through the 4 groups of people who are not in work. We've just talked about long-term sick and disabled. That's about 2.5 million people. Around a quarter of those say they would like to work. We also have 1 million people who are unemployed without any sickness or disability. So that group alone could fill the vacancies. Then there's 600,000 parents of under 5s, many of whom have been prevented from working by high childcare costs. The budget will reduce their childcare costs by up to 60%. And then there's the over 50s, some of whom have been pushed into early retirement by the way the pension tax works, and we've put forward a solution to that. So what I'm trying to do is to make sure that our businesses can find the labour that they need in order to make sure that recruitment isn't a problem. We will, at the margins, always be pragmatic. So, for example, we put care homes on the shortage occupation list, some construction industry sectors, and we will keep talking to all of you about where there are short-term challenges. But the long-term future is to, if I give you an example, if we have about 76% employment rate of our adult population, which is about average for the OECD. If we had the employment levels they have in Holland, we would have 2.7 million more people in work than we currently do. And Holland has a higher GDP per head than we have. So what we need to do is to tap into the incredible potential that we have at home, at the same time, and as we make that journey, to be sensible and pragmatic about the immigration requirements where there are particular pressures.
And the point you make about investing in the workforce that aren't active at the moment is a really important one. But that definitely will take time, and that involves a lot of partnerships with, you know, FE colleges and the likes to try and move those people into work. But given that we know that this debate is very political at the moment about immigration, can you send an assurance to the members in this room that you will bang the drum for their needs at the cabinet table, even when there are dissenting voices, and say, look, it is important for British business to get the skills they need. They can't wait sort of 10, 15 years. They do need those skills now.
I don't need to bang the drum because the government is completely united on this. If you look at what's happened since the Brexit vote, since we left the EU, since we left the single market, the government has been pragmatic when it comes to immigration requirements. But we also want to work with you to be better at tapping into the potential that we have at home and to help you make sure that, for example, you don't lose valued employees when they have young kids. And,
or women who go through the menopause.
Or indeed that, or older people who might have a back problem that prompts an early retirement when actually they'd rather carry on working. So I think this is a collective effort to boost or to make sure that we all remove the barriers to work for people who want to work.
And one of the big removals of barriers which came out of the pandemic has been working from home. Again, it's become quite a divisive issue. Where do you stand on that?
I think it's something that... Sorry, I'm just going to give myself a little bit of water.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's something for businesses to find their own way through. There are some very exciting opportunities created by the fact that we've all learnt to use Zoom and Teams for meetings. Actually, one example is childcare. So, you know, it's not now the case that someone who has a baby needs to be completely out of contact for years and years.
In fact, they have to have their baby on the Zoom call. That's the joy of the Zoom call.
And we all accept that, and it's absolutely fine. So it gives lots of choices. If you have a disability, it gives you the chance, and you have a mobility issue. You're in a wheelchair. You know, a decade ago, there was a presumption that you wouldn't be able to do lots of jobs, which we don't now need to have. On the other hand, there is nothing like sitting around a table, seeing people face to face, developing team spirit. And I worry about the loss of creativity when people are permanently working from home and not having those water cooler moments where they bounce ideas off each other. And not every great business idea happens in a structured, formal meeting. And so I think that's why increasingly businesses are saying they want people back unless there's a reason. I think we will get to a point where the default is, with the exception of specific categories of work, like, for example, call center work, but I think the default will be you work in the office unless there's a good reason not to be in the office, and gradually we're getting there.
Now, let's turn to the issue of the EU. And of course, we've recently had this Windsor agreement, and that's definitely changed the mood with Britain's relationship with the EU. But in every survey that the BCC has done since Brexit, these surveys show that British business is still finding trade with Europe very, very difficult. Will you look at new ways that you can sort out issues like VAT and, of course, the sort of thicket of paperwork and red tape that many people in this room have to battle?
We will always look at ways to reduce bureaucracy for businesses. We have now a very solid framework for our future relations with the EU that has been settled by the Windsor framework, but more importantly, the goodwill that has created, and I think it was a remarkable achievement by Rishi Sunak to negotiate that agreement. The goodwill that has created means it's possible to have conversations with the EU about all sorts of issues that previously we weren't able to do. So we are committed to the trading arrangements we have. We think we can make them work. What I would say, though, is that we want to remain friends with our neighbours in Europe. I think Ukraine has also changed the mood music and helped them understand this wasn't the bitter, angry divorce that they feared. We are good Europeans, and we will be there for fundamental interests of European security and European values, such as represented by Ukraine. But when I look at Europe, what I say is there is a fantastic opportunity for the UK. Look at, I mean, just on the very narrow issue of Brexit, we've grown faster than Germany since the Brexit vote, and the IMF forecasts that were published in Washington last month say that from 2025 they're predicting the UK will grow faster than France, Germany or Italy. So we are absolutely weathering the change in economic relations that Brexit represents.
You will concede that it has been tough for a lot of people in this room, and it has been tough for a lot of British businesses of all sizes.
Any change in your trading relations with your biggest trading partner presents challenges, and the people in this room have also had to deal with, you know, the energy price shock, biggest since the 1970s, the pandemic. It's been a period where there have been lots of big things that have been very challenging for businesses to deal with. But the bigger picture is that we have an opportunity now to become Europe's Silicon Valley. If you look at the industries that the UK is doing the best in, they are the industries that are growing the fastest and are going to grow the fastest over the next 10, 20 years. So I'll just give you some examples, because I want to reflect some of Siobhan's optimism about our long-term prospects. I know it's been a very, very difficult period, but life sciences, we have become in the last decade Europe's biggest life science industry. We provided one of the 2 big vaccines in the pandemic, the biggest treatment, dexamethasone. This country probably saved more lives across the globe than any other because of our science and research. Technology, I obviously care about this because I was a tech entrepreneur myself, but France has 36 unicorns, Germany 63. We have 144, more than double France and Germany combined. So we are doing extremely well, and Google just announced that they are centering their global research effort on artificial intelligence in London. Clean energy, second biggest renewable sector in Europe. We now get 40% of our electricity from renewables. We've become Europe's largest film and TV sector over that period. We have great strengths in advanced manufacturing. So I'm not saying, let's be absolutely clear, that we are Europe's Silicon Valley. This will be hotly fought over. But I think if you look at our track record and what we've achieved, if you look at the fact that we've got a very strong higher education sector, a very strong financial services sector, this is an opportunity for us. And that's why I think we can be confident that we will have tremendous growth going forward. But it's up to us, as every business person here knows, it's up to us to make the most of that opportunity.
Now, we're just about to go to some questions. We're going to have some press questions, and then we'll take a couple of questions from the floor. So do get ready if you've got any questions. And just before I hand over to the press, just one final question from me, again, on the B word, Brexit. A couple of nights ago, the godfather, the architect of Brexit, Nigel Farage, was on Newsnight, and he said that Brexit had been a failure. What do you say to that?
I think I'm someone who's pre-2016 was on a different side of that argument to Nigel Farage. But my view is that when you make a change like that, it is up to us. It is our choice. Now, if you look at the changes that Brexit has brought about, the one that's most significant for the people in this room as an opportunity is the fact that we have total regulatory autonomy. So there will be people here who have grumbles and complaints about the regulators responsible for their sectors, but we are able to change the rules under which our regulators operate through decisions by the UK government in a way that wasn't possible when we were in the EU. So one small example of that in life sciences, in the budget I was able to announce that from now on the MHRA, which in the pandemic showed itself to be one of the most nimble medicines regulators in the world, they were the first in the world to approve a COVID vaccine, they have decided that they will approve semi-automatically drugs that have been approved in America, Europe, or Japan. And for people who come and get their drugs approved here, we will be the fastest regulator in the world to approve. So if you want to get drugs to market, you'll be able to do that more quickly here than anywhere else. That's a really exciting vision for people who want to develop new medicines. And that regulatory autonomy is something where there's lots more work to do, but there's a really big opportunity for us to create massive opportunities for the businesses in this room.
Excellent. That is a Brexit benefit right there. Now, I think we are going to have some questions from the media to start off with, and I think we're going to take our first question from Simon Jack of the BBC.
Thank you. Chancellor, you'll know that car maker Stellantis has said it cannot meet post-Brexit rules of origin requirements due to come in at the beginning of next year, and is preparing its life for tariffs on its exports, threatening the future of plants here. What can you do about that? And secondly, under your predecessor and the person who hired you, the words industrial strategy were effectively banned. Is it time for the UK to have a clear industrial strategy, and when can businesses expect to see it?
Well, let me take both those questions. They're very important. We do have an industrial strategy. We've been very clear about that. We've identified 5 growth sectors that we think we will need to give special support to, which I listed earlier, but technology, life sciences, clean energy, creative industries, and advanced manufacturing. If you look at the budget, it was squarely focused on the 2 biggest issues facing business today: business investment, how to boost that, labour supply, and I've been very clear about our strategy. I called it the 4 E's: education, enterprise, employment, and everywhere, as being the way that we are going to make ourselves the most prosperous, innovative, and dynamic economy in Europe. So I think it's actions, not words. I'm very happy to call that an industrial strategy. I'm very happy to call it a growth plan, but what it is doing is tackling the problems that British businesses face. And one of our key growth sectors is automotive, which is a very central part of the advanced manufacturing sector. It's a great British success story. And as we move to EVs, we need to have battery making capacity in the UK. We have the ability, under the post-Brexit trading arrangements, to import EV batteries from other EU countries, but the reality is there is a supply shortage. Everyone is trying to develop supply of EV batteries, and so we need to have that supply here in the UK. The closer it's located to the factories that are making the rest of the car, the better. And all I would say is watch this space, because we are very focused on making sure the UK gets that EV manufacturing capacity.
And I think we have our next question from Katie Prescott of the Times newspaper.
Hi, Chancellor. Thanks very much for taking the question. You alluded to it just then, and you've repeatedly said that you want to make the UK a science and technology superpower by 2030. But I keep hearing from tech businesses here in the UK about their frustration operating here. So Revolut spoke to me recently about their irritation at onerous regulation, a crunch in talent, and high taxes. Siobhan mentioned Paragraph in her speech, another company, a semiconductor business that's been very vocal about this as well. And then, of course, we heard from Microsoft, their president, Brad Smith, saying that the European Union is a more attractive place to do business than the UK. What do you say to these tech companies about these frustrations, and how do you plan to try and keep them here?
Well, the first thing is we are not just Europe's biggest tech sector, but the 3rd biggest in the world after the United States and China, and it is absolutely central to our ambitions, and I think we demonstrated that when we stepped in to save Silicon Valley Bank, which was, London office was looking after the bank accounts of a number of very, very important tech and life science businesses. So the first thing I would say is, if you have any concerns, come and talk to me, come and talk to Kemi Badenoch, come and talk to Michelle Donnellan, because we want to do everything we can to support those businesses. in Revolut's case in particular, I have had a number of discussions, and we are introducing a growth duty for our financial sector regulators in the Financial Services and Markets Bill that is coming up. And they have been very responsive recently in understanding the need to foster the UK's competitiveness, and fintech is one of our great success stories. When it comes to Microsoft, I mean, there was a merger between two American companies that the US regulator is seeking to block. The UK regulator took the same view. I think one of the reasons that companies like Microsoft and Google want to invest in the UK is because we have independent regulators that aren't controlled by politicians, and therefore they can be confident there will be a level playing field. I would not want to undermine that at all, but I do think it's important all our regulators understand their wider responsibilities for economic growth. But for our tech sector, it isn't just being able to get through big deals. Competition really matters. And if we can have the highest levels of competitive intensity, in the end, that's what will make this the most exciting place in life sciences, technology, clean energy, all those other sectors.
Right, we now have a tiny bit of time for a couple of questions from the audience. Lady at the front, I think we'll have a roving microphone that will make, yeah, so the lady at the front here. And if you just give us your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Liz Kidney from the Kent Chamber of Commerce. In Kent, we've recently had significant financial investment withdrawn for the Lower Thames Crossing and other big strategic infrastructure projects. How confident are you that all of the departments are linked up so that when I hear all the things you're saying about business growth, but things like that massively impact? There's also been significant investment through levelling up in the Port of Dover, but these obviously show that there's a lack of joined up thinking. I wonder if you could give your thoughts on that, because it's something that's a really significant issue for growth in our area.
Well, I completely understand that. So let me just say that infrastructure investment is incredibly important. In the autumn statement, I was faced with having to cut spending by 30 billion. And I took the decision not to cut our capital budget in cash terms, but I wasn't able to deliver the increases that had been previously planned. I think that it was the right thing not to cut our spending, because infrastructure is so important. And you know, as soon as we can afford to, we'll put more into that, because it's very important for our long-term productive efficiency. That's why we had to have the delay on the Lower Thames Crossing. But you know, we protected HS2, we protected core Northern Powerhouse Rail, and that is because, I mean, Kent has got some pockets of deprivation as well as some areas of prosperity. Our vision has to be a vision which spreads into every corner of the UK. Otherwise, in the end, we're going to have this imbalance where people feel they have to move to London and the more affluent parts of the southeast, and that is not a sustainable long-term economic model.
Right, we've got time for one more question. Lady at the back, yeah.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Chancellor. It's Miranda Barker from East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. As you know, we've been supporting an awful lot of low-carbon tech companies in Lancashire. And we have a really successful organisation called Lena Energy, who are making sodium batteries, which is the better solution following on from lithium-ion batteries. But we've supported them with your support, with the university innovation, with Innovate UK grants, all the way through the development of the technology, and they are now about to be attracted away by Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. What do we do to keep those technologies, to make them commercialise here and create the jobs here? How can we work together to do that?
Well, we have to work together to do that. The Inflation Reduction Act is a challenge. There's no question about it. But even taking account of the huge sums of money that the US is investing in the Inflation Reduction Act, they are still not investing as much as we are as a proportion of GDP in clean energy. We've done it through market-based solutions rather than subsidies. but we understand that subsidies have a role. And so we are going through a process now. I said in the budget that it would conclude at the very latest by the autumn statement. But we needed to see what the European response was to IRA before we concluded our full response. But I want to reassure you that we will make sure that we remain competitive. It's very important we do. We're very proud. We've reduced emissions by more than any other advanced economy. We are a world leader in offshore wind. We have the largest offshore wind farm in the world and the second largest and the third largest. So there are some very big commercial opportunities. Batteries, hydrogen, CCUS, these are very strategic sectors for the UK. They will get maximum possible support from the government.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our session with our Chancellor. And we're really grateful for the time you've given up. We know how busy you are. You've been incredibly generous with your time. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause for Jeremy Hunt. Thank you so much. Fascinating, really great. Now, today's conference has been supported by some of the British Chambers of Commerce's key partners and is headlined by NatWest. Now, before we go off for a wee tea and coffee break, NatWest Chief Operating Officer Solange Chamberlain is here to tell us about the brilliant work they do with the BCC and the breakout session that they will be leading on economic growth. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Solange.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Aisha. It's a privilege to be here with you for the second year in a row and to follow the Chancellor and Siobhan on this stage with you all. I've been told I've got 5 minutes before the coffee break to discuss building British business, so no pressure, and I'll try and hit as many points as possible. Our purpose at NatWest is to champion the potential of the people, families, and businesses that we serve at each stage of the journey, whether things are going well or things are challenging. As the largest bank for business in the UK, I cannot think of a more important, mission-critical thing that we could do to help you, and it also means that our fortunes between NatWest and you, our customers, are intertwined. I won't go into and revise the discussions had earlier today around the current economic environment. I think the best way to sum it up is probably the word perma-crisis. We seem to be experiencing one in a 100-year event at an increasing speed. And I can't think of a time when businesses have faced such a series of unprecedented crises and experience a squeeze on their margin that has not been seen for over 25 years. Businesses first have to survive COVID. And again, I'd like to thank everyone in my business, but also the collaboration across people in this room, the government, politicians, regulators, in having had the ability to support businesses quickly and at pace at this time. But as soon as that was overcome, you then had to face rising costs, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, inflation, and higher interest rates. Different businesses of different sizes, in different sectors, in different regions, have been impacted differently. And it has been great to see the overall resilience that there has been. However, we're very conscious that more challenges lie ahead. And again, I'm very proud of all the work our colleagues have done. And we've been able to perform over 700,000 financial health checks to make sure we're there by the side of businesses and helping foresee what can happen. But we appreciate that it's tough and no respite likely to come soon. But time awaits for no one, and there are great opportunities ahead. Some of our colleagues did some analysis, and we think there's over 140 billion added value to the economy by 2030 that businesses can provide. That equates to roughly 3.2 million new jobs. However, for those businesses to capture those opportunities rather than for them to become challenges, they need support to scale, grow, and become the best that they can be. And finance and the provision and availability of finance is clearly key to that, but it is not sufficient. We hear from businesses and they need support, advice, and help to connect in the local community. This is why at NatWest, we have a network of 14 accelerator hubs all across the UK, where we work with entrepreneurs, provide them support, and recently launched a high growth proposition because we realize the challenges of not just starting and having a successful business, but really being able to scale it. And I think the ability for the ecosystem and everyone to come together all across the various regions has led to many success stories. And as I've said at the beginning, everything to get to those opportunities is a team sport. And it requires collaboration from the financial sectors, but also from the chambers, from industry, from bigger businesses, and also from the government or the regulator, so we can provide that holistic package to help you succeed, which will mean the UK will succeed. To take climate as an example, a topic very close to my heart, and hopefully we all agree it is the right thing to do, full stop, but it is also a massive growth opportunity, and you heard some examples referred to earlier. Finance, again, is key, but when we speak to customers, the customers want to do the right thing, and they want to do the right thing more and more despite all of the other challenges. But access to knowledge and data are proving big barriers. This is why 12 months ago, again in this room, we launched a tool for everybody, whether you're a customer of NatWest or not, free of charge, that helps you from little information, estimate your footprint, and indicate some action that you can take. Again, a lot of them are win-win. So I'm sure you all agree, given the audience in this room, that those challenges and the unlock to the opportunity won't happen and won't be down to just a few decision makers in London. It will be driven by the businesses, including the chambers, in every region of the UK, which is, and again, going back to climate, it's amazing when I look at the stats that actually we see more business and startup creation outside of London than in London over the last 18 months, which is again testament to how different regions and different industries are operating more broadly than the South East. This is why, again, our hubs, but also having relationship managers that are embedded in the communities, in the ecosystem, who can spend time with you and support you, is something we believe extremely important, even as we support it by digital solutions to make everybody's lives easier. We also launched the SME Task Force alongside the BCC and other industry groups, and again, we have been launching that not just in London, but across the region of the UK. I think my 5 minutes are up, so I'll say thank you very much. I look forward to seeing many of you later today as we have a panel discussion with some brilliant attendees to talk about building British businesses. So please do register. It's at 1 p.m. And I hope you enjoy the networking break.
Thank you. Well done. Well done. Thanks very much, Solange. Now, it's very much time for a little break. I was going to say a wee break, but that sounds a bit too much information, doesn't it? So please do go grab a hot drink from the main room, and do remember to download that app, and if you need any help, go and see somebody at the BCC stand. We will start again at 10:45, and we'll be joined by Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England. We will see you then.
it's Emma next.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back your compare, Aisha Hazarika, MBE.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your break and you're ready for our next couple of speeches before lunch. And we have some absolutely cracking guests lined up. We're very shortly going to be hearing from the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, as well as global speaker and serial entrepreneur, Lindsay Boyd. But first, to kick us off, I'd like to give the stage to Emma Gilthorpe. She is Chief Operating Officer from Heathrow. Now, Heathrow is a supporting partner today and will be leading the session on trade. Emma's going to tell us all about the session that they're going to lead before she introduces Andrew Bailey. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Emma Gilthorpe.
Hi everyone. Wow, it's wonderful to see such a full room today, and thank you very much for giving me a brief opportunity to talk a little bit about Heathrow. So, the theme of today's conference is building British business, which of course is more important than ever as we seek to recover from COVID and also through this very high inflationary period. Events like today are absolutely essential in, of course, bringing us all together, which we missed so much during COVID, to share our learnings and our visions, but most importantly, to help us achieve our common goal of a prosperous and sustainable United Kingdom. Crucial to this goal and to the successes of many of your businesses is the facilitation of trade and tourism across the country. Now, my sector, aviation, I hope we can all agree, is a force for good. It supports millions of people's livelihoods, it builds understanding across cultures, connects family and friends, and accelerates global trade. I'm very proud to be, although a bit tired, the Chief Operating Officer of Heathrow, now once again Europe's busiest airport, and of course the UK's only hub airport. That hub airport enables us to connect the UK's nations and regions to the rest of the world. And at Heathrow, passengers can access 200 destinations across more than 80 countries. And we're only one of a handful of international airports to offer this level of long-haul connectivity, including to emerging economies in the BRIC and the CPTPP nations. What also makes us unique is that Heathrow is the UK's largest port by value. This means that on those 200 routes that we serve, we're carrying more than £180 billion worth of goods underneath the feet of our passengers, truly connecting British exports to global growth. That includes, fascinatingly, £240 million of Scottish salmon. That is a lot of salmon. You'll hear a bit more about this at our breakout session later on. But we know that the benefits of aviation cannot come at any cost. Climate change is an existential threat to us all, and our collective challenge is to protect the benefits of flying in a world without carbon. The aviation industry can and must achieve net zero by 2050. That's going to happen through a combination of sustainable aviation fuels, developing net zero emissions target aircraft, and investing in carbon removal projects. There doesn't need to be a choice between growth in aviation and protecting our climate. We can and must deliver both. IATA estimate that sustainable aviation fuel alone could contribute up to 65% of the reduction in emissions required to meet net zero by 2050. The production of SAF is a real and present opportunity for the UK's industrial policy and economy and has the potential for wide-scale economic benefits. Some say of over £900 million worth of GVA and nearly 7,000 jobs across the UK. A UK SAF market will boost our national fuel security, foster domestic supply chains, and create new green skills. And we need the government to legislate for the 2030 SAF mandate, which they are on track to do so far. But we also need them to introduce a price support mechanism that will incentivise the growth of that industry here in the UK for British jobs and British prosperity. But it's not just government. Businesses in this room can help too. Heathrow, along with many other businesses, is part of King Charles's Sustainable Markets Initiative. And they've come up with a 30 by 30 proposal which calls for private sector businesses to commit to 30% SAF usage by 2030. The 30 by 30 initiative allows your business to pledge to the use of SAF for 30% of your business travel, stimulating demand, driving down cost, and helping to protect all of the benefits that aviation brings. If that's something that your organisation would be interested in playing a part in, then please do speak to a member of the BCC team, and they'll be able to pass on your contact details. I really do commend that initiative to you. So, now on to the real reason why I'm standing up in front of you today. My job is to introduce your next speaker, and I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing Andrew Bailey, our Governor of the Bank of England. Andrew began his career as Governor in March 2020, following a distinguished career in the financial industry. Prior to becoming Governor, Andrew served as CEO of the Financial Conduct Authority from July 2016. And as CEO of the FCA, he was also a member of the Prudential Regulation Committee, the Financial Policy Committee, and served on the board of the Financial Conduct Authority. Please put your hands together and welcome Andrew Bailey onto the stage.
Well, thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here today, to be here at the BCC's annual conference. And I think the programme is a testament to the vibrancy and innovative spirit of UK businesses rooted in local communities. And I think that's very encouraging. And I really can't emphasise enough how important it is to me and my colleagues to hear from businesses and communities around the country firsthand. Now, we all benefit from the data and surveys, of course, including the informative recruitment and economic surveys that the BCC conducts. But conversations with people running businesses and organisations give us the stories behind the economic data. They help us to connect with what's happening on the ground in the UK economy, and I can't emphasise enough how valuable that is to us. And what we find, and what I find, is that businesses, and you all tell us about the local challenges you're facing before we see them in the official data, and that helps us hugely. And of course, that intelligence has been particularly vital during the uncertain times that we've been going through over the last few years, which I'm going to focus on today. It's also why we have our own extensive network of agents, regional agents, who work across 12, we divide the country up into 12 regions and nations in this country. And they spend their time talking to businesses and local organisations in all parts of the country. They are our eyes and ears, if you like, in local communities across the country. And all of those, the rest of us, and those of us who are on the Monetary Policy Committee, join them regularly. My commitment and what I do each year is that I visit each of the 12 regions and nations at least once a year so that I can hear directly from all of you and from businesses as to what's going on. And in fact, only yesterday I was in the southwest in and around Exeter. So whether it's as I was yesterday, for part of the time, on a family farm producing cheese in Devon, headquarters of a national supermarket chain in London, a major industrial production site in the northeast, there's always something that certainly I can say I learn from these conversations. whether it's about our understanding of the labour market and employment, of the supply chains, the competitive environment in different parts of the country. All these stories help us to understand what's going on. And I always say to people when I do these sessions, you know, when we're sitting in the Monetary Policy Committee meetings, we do bring these anecdotes and these stories directly into the meetings. It's quite common for one of us, me or one of the others, to say, you know, I was somewhere and I was talking to this business and they said this and it seems to fit or it doesn't fit with what we're talking about. It really is invaluable. So I want to take the opportunity today to talk about the current position of the UK economy, drawing on all of that information, and obviously to put that into the context of the decision we took in the MPC last Thursday to increase bank rate by a further 0.25 percentage points to 4.5%. Now, I have to start with a very simple and blunt statement. Inflation, of course, is much too high, and it's our job to bring it back sustainably to the 2% target, and that's what we're going to do. But I want to begin by describing the quite extraordinary situation that we find ourselves in. It's now over 3 years since COVID struck and, of course, changed our lives in many ways. And the virus first disrupted economic activity on a vast scale. We all remember it. It called for huge public policy interventions, ones really that few of us, I think, had ever thought we would see in our lifetimes. And then I think in subsequent waves, even as we learnt to adapt and benefit from effective vaccines developed at, frankly, record speed, what COVID did was to continue to contribute immense uncertainty, that is certainly for outcomes in public health, but actually for the economy as well. And it's striking that after a huge sort of drop off a cliff in the spring of 2020 and quite an initial recovery as the summer went on, the level of economic activity measured certainly by monthly GDP in this country has failed to grow beyond its pre-pandemic level on a sustained basis. It's still hovering around now the level that it got to round about in early 2022. And in the latest release in March, it fell a bit. Now that sets the UK apart from other advanced economies. Both the euro area and actually especially the United States have more than recovered the economic ground lost during the pandemic. Now that slow recovery here came alongside a series of big supply shocks that have continued to shape economic and inflationary dynamics in this country. I just want to run through them just very briefly because I think it's important just to lay them out briefly. So the first of these big shocks was a very sharp rise in the price of globally traded goods and global supply chains were overwhelmed by what was a quite persistent and not really expected shift in demand from services to goods across the advanced economies. But that shock has now considerably reduced and global supply pressures have eased. Now, the second big supply shock was caused by Russia's appalling war on Ukraine and its people. That had the effect of driving up wholesale gas prices in European markets, something I know all of us and you've all suffered from. And this has been the largest single contributor to CPI inflation in this country by some distance. While making up less than 1/20th of the CPI basket, electricity and gas have directly added up to 3.5 percentage points to overall UK inflation. Now, energy prices have now fallen from their peaks over recent months, and we do expect the effects of this shock will also now reverse. The third shock that I want to mention is a domestic one. As COVID had hit, UK labour supply growth came to an abrupt halt. The size of the workforce declined by more than 130,000 people, or nearly 0.5%, in the 3 months from December 2019 to the 3 months to January this year. Now, the primary cause of that reduction in labour supply is an increase in economic inactivity, not just reflecting the ageing of the population, which I have to sadly say was happening anyway, but also driven by a fall in the share of working-age people taking part in the labour market. And this has contributed to inflationary pressure. Now, in the most recent data, including the data released yesterday morning, there are some signs that this shock is now beginning to reverse, especially amongst younger people. The fourth shock is the one that I think possibly gets the most attention at the moment, and that is the sharp rise in food prices. A year ago, I did comment that disruptions to Ukraine's supply of agricultural products to the global market could drive up food prices to worrying levels. Since then, annual CPI inflation for food and non-alcoholic beverages in this country has risen from just under 6% in March 2022 to just over 19% in the latest, that's March of this year, number. Now, this is not just a phenomenon in this country. Other European countries have similar food price inflation rates. The increases in energy prices and poor harvests, in addition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have played a role throughout the European continent. These big external shocks continue to account for a large part of the inflation overshoot above target. Now, there's another effect here, because in worsening the terms on which we trade with the outside world, the rise in external prices has reduced our real national income. And this is being felt by households across the country, and most acutely by those on lower incomes. This inflation, which is concentrated more than usually in the essentials of life, fuel, energy, food, is hurting the least well-off even harder, because those staples are a much bigger share of their consumption than they are for those who are better off. And in my visit to Devon yesterday, I went to Citizens Advice in Exeter to meet people who are helping those at the sharp end of the rise in the cost of living. It's clear that many people face difficult choices and have had to cut back even on essentials. We know that higher interest rates make things hard for many people too. But we're conscious that high inflation always hits the least well-off the hardest. And our job is to make sure inflation is low and stable. So we have had to raise interest rates to bring inflation back down. Now, I'm going to push back against one argument that you do here, which is that inflation is high because monetary policy was too loose in the past. My colleagues Ben Broadbent and Silvana Tenrera countered that assertion in detail recently. And the headline I'll say is this: even if we had had the benefit of full hindsight in the run-up to the war in Ukraine and ample advanced warning, which for the record, of course, we didn't, I'm afraid, nobody did, then in order to keep inflation at around 2%, we would have had to raise bank rate well into double digits, sending unemployment much higher than it is today. We would have had to do that in the middle of the worst pandemic in more than a century. And the work that Ben and Silvana did shows that if we really could have followed this course on monetary policy, and let's say then that the subsequent increase in input prices, inflation, hadn't happened, inflation would have fallen steeply, well into negative territory, and real incomes would have suffered through lower wages as well as much higher unemployment. All of that's to say that monetary policy can't make this impact on real incomes go away. I wish it could, but it can't. What we have to do, though, is take action to ensure that inflation falls as these external shocks abate, and that the inflationary impulse that these shocks deliver does not cause persistent domestic second-round effects in wage and price setting that could hold inflation up for longer. And that's why we've increased bank rate by nearly 4.5 percentage points, from December 2021, when it was then 0.1%, to the 4.5% that it is now. Now, you may say at this point, thank you for being such a doomster. So let me say, things are looking a bit brighter than they did a couple of months ago. It's always good for me to come on and say that. We published our latest monetary policy report last week. But if I go back to the report we published in November last year, so exactly 6 months ago, at that time, we expected a shallow but long recession in the UK economy. In our latest last week's report, we're now forecasting modest but positive growth and a much smaller increase in unemployment. Now, what are the causes of that? Well, above all, the improvement in the outlook reflects a very large fall in wholesale gas prices. And that reverses some of the terms of trade shock that I was talking about and have been the primary cause of falling real incomes. But alongside that, there has also been a greater resilience in the economy than we had expected. And we can see that most obviously in the employment and unemployment numbers, which have been consistently stronger than we expected. Now, fiscal policy, I know you had the Chancellor come along earlier, fiscal policy has also given a boost to the economy, and global growth has been holding up better than we thought, particularly in the euro area, and particularly in China, which came through its ending of zero COVID, with fewer, I think, adverse effects than we feared might be the case. Now, at the same time, I'm afraid inflation has come in higher than expected, and much of that reflects the food price story I was just telling. The latest figure for March, 10.1%, was 0.8 percentage points higher than we had expected 3 months ago at the time of our February monetary policy report. Now, we do have very good reasons to expect inflation to fall sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released next Wednesday. Energy prices have fallen from their peaks, and that will start to come through as lower inflation. To give you a perspective on that, in the March release, the price of electricity, gas, and other fuels was more than 85% higher than a year ago, and that contributes more than 3% to headline inflation. We expect, and this is really mathematical, it's not behavioral, that that contribution will drop significantly to about 1 percentage point in next week's data for April, as those large increases from a year ago drop out of the calculation. And looking ahead to the end of this year, if energy prices evolve as financial market prices suggest they will, that contribution from energy will fall further. And towards the end of this year, energy prices should begin to pull overall inflation down rather than push it up as they have done over much of the past 2 years. Now, we can be less sure about the timing of global food price inflation, but we do believe, and all the food producers and food retailers that I talk to support this story, we do expect it to start to ease too. Global prices of wholesale agricultural commodities have come down since spring of last year, and food producer price indices have eased in recent months too. And the evidence that our agents get suggests that food producers expect food production costs to begin to moderate. Now, this is taking longer than we previously thought, but we should expect it to feed through to consumer and food inflation over the coming year. And that's the message I can hear when I go and visit food producers and retailers around the country. But, and you probably think I would say this, we need to continue to keep a watchful eye on other components of consumer price inflation. What we call core inflation, which excludes energy and food prices, the more volatile elements, is driven by items that can have a more persistent inflationary dynamic. And in the latest number for March, at 6.2%, core inflation remains elevated. Now, some of that elevation reflects the indirect effects of higher energy prices. But it also reflects second-round developments as those external shocks that we have seen interact with the state of the domestic economy. And as headline inflation falls, these second-round effects are unlikely to go away as quickly as they appeared. There's an asymmetry in there, if you like. And on the Monetary Policy Committee, we spent a lot of time on this issue, and we do think that this asymmetry is important in the inflationary dynamics that we're experiencing. So we do pay a lot of attention to measures and indicators of inflation persistence, and those include the tightness of the labour market, wage growth, services price inflation. Now, when you sum up all the news that we've seen on this front recently, it's quite mixed, really. There are some signs, and we saw it yesterday in the numbers, that the labour market is beginning to loosen a little. There's been some recovery in participation, especially amongst younger workers, and the number of vacancies has come down from the very high levels we were seeing. The ratio of the number of vacancies to the number of unemployed, which is a key measure of that tightness, has fallen as a result. I should say, though, from record levels of tightness, that is. Our agents report that businesses face fewer recruitment difficulties, that employees are moving jobs less frequently, and employers are getting more applications for job vacancies. But that easing of the tightness is happening at a slower pace than we had expected. And the labour market does remain very tight. The number of vacancies remains significantly higher relative to the number of unemployed than before the pandemic. And the figures for employment have been strong. Now, meanwhile, nominal wage growth and services price inflation have evolved much as we had been expecting. Nominal pay growth has fallen back slightly, and near-term indicators suggest that pay growth could ease further later this year. And that's backed up by what our agents hear on their visits. Contacts tend to tell us that pay settlements have been stable in recent months, and they expect the decline in inflation and the looser labour market to begin to reduce pay awards in the second half of the year. Services inflation is still elevated, however, and the extent to which firms have already passed through higher costs will influence the pace at which it declines. So, while, as I said, we expect CPI inflation to fall quite sharply as energy costs begin to ease, though at a somewhat slower pace than we expected in February, given particularly the near-term outlook for food prices. The outlook for inflation further out is more uncertain, and it does depend on the question of persistence in wage and price setting. Now, we had a baseline projection in the report we published last year, conditional on actually what the market thinks is going to happen to bank rate, and the market thinks it's going to peak, at that point, thought it was going to peak at around 4.75% in the fourth quarter of this year. We do see some greater economic slack opening up. We do see the external pressures declining, and we do think that that will cause inflation to fall materially below the 2% target in the medium term. That was our baseline view. However, there's always a however, we do think that the risks to that inflation outlook are skewed significantly to the upside because of this risk of greater persistence. The unwinding of these second-round effects may take longer than it did for them to emerge, and we are in highly unusual times. Yet we don't have a sort of ready reckoner which says how the economy behaves in these sorts of times, given the shocks that I outlined earlier. And so we have included a material upside risk to the inflation outlook over the medium term. And what that means in summary is that, again, conditional on what the market thinks is going to happen to interest rates, in that view of the world, inflation still comes back to the target of 2% and stays around it, or just below it, in the second and third years of our forecast. So in other words, after the first year from now. Now, let me emphasize very clearly then, this upside risk doesn't actually call into question us getting back to the inflation target. But I think it's an important, in a sense, assessment of how we get back there. Before I end, let me just briefly go on a couple of other points. Changes in our bank rate appear to have passed through, as would be expected, into new mortgage and corporate borrowing rates. The pass-through into household sight deposit rates has been muted, but rates on term deposits and fixed-rate bonds have risen more in line with changes in bank rate itself. And I should emphasise that people should seek out the opportunities that a competitive market in retail banking produces to take advantage of those rates. Now, in recent months, overseas bank failures have resulted in asset price volatility, and spreads on UK banks' wholesale funding costs rose for a while. But it turned out in this country that was quite short-lived. We didn't see a lasting impact on interest rates facing households and companies. The UK banking sector remains resilient. It's got robust capital and strong liquidity positions. And in my view, it continues to have the capacity to support the economy and to support businesses and households. People should be able to rely on their banks. And that's important for us in setting monetary policy because it means we haven't had to aim off in setting monetary policy because of the situation in the financial system. And that's an important thing to be in a position to do. Now, the changes that we have made in interest rates are still working their way through the system. We've seen higher rates quoted on new mortgages, and while the effective rates on new mortgage lending have been increasing, the effective rate on the whole stock of mortgages is still in the process of adjusting. The reason for that is that the mortgage market has changed substantially in the last 10 to 20 years. There is now a much larger share of fixed-rate mortgages in this country. So that as this process plays out, the rises in bank rate that we have put in place since December 2021 will weigh more on the economy. There is some more effect to come through that, and we factor that in very closely. And that was an important element of the discussion in forming our view that we should increase bank rates, as we did last week, to 4.5%. So we are continuing to address the risk of more persistent strength in domestic price and wage setting, as represented by this upward risk, if you like, in the distribution. We will continue to monitor very closely the indicators of persistence in inflationary pressures. And we will adjust, as we think is necessary, bank rate to return inflation to target sustainably in the medium term, as our remit tells us we should do. If we saw much greater persistence or more persistence, then we would have to undertake further tightening in monetary policy. That's our commitment. We will judge it according to the evidence. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you so much. That was a fascinating speech you just gave, lots in there. We're going to have a question from the press and 2 questions from the audience. But before that, I mean, you know, you've addressed the sort of strategy behind the interest rates rises. I just wanted to ask you if you're ever worried that there might be a danger in overshooting now, particularly when inflation is due to come down, which could choke off growth. That is an argument that I do hear from some economists.
Well, it's something that we do have we watch very carefully because we are, as I said a few minutes ago, in these completely unprecedented times. You know, we've had this huge run-up, obviously, in inflation. You know, I set out the shocks that were going on. And I'll just emphasize this point, that one of the things that we have spent a lot of time on is this question about, you know, will it be symmetrical? Will it be, you know, will inflation come down as we saw it go up, or will it take longer to come down? It will come down, by the way. And we have to judge that very carefully. And as you say, we have to judge the impact on activity in the economy and how much slack there is in the economy. And I think it's, you know, it's interesting. I mean, this is an encouraging story, I should say. As I said, you know, the economy has been more resilient, and particularly the labour market has been more resilient. Now, I should say I see that in many of the discussions I have with businesses around the country, because people say to me, a lot of people say to me, look, I found it so hard to recruit people that I'm hanging on to them, come what may, as it were. And that's logical, because a lot of people say to me, you know, if I have to make an adjustment, it will be more on the hours worked rather than on the number of people. because I don't want to go through it again, having to recruit people once the economy recovers. And that's resilience, and that's a good story. And we take that into consideration. But just to reassure you, we do spend a lot of time thinking about the sort of, where do you get the right balance in terms of what we do.
No, it's such an important point. That sort of labour market tightness is very, very important. I think we're going to take a media question. I think we're going to go to Bloomberg News.
Yeah, hi, Phil Aldrich from Bloomberg. Just a question about the credibility of the Bank of England. Obviously, you missed the inflation shock, and now we're raising rates more aggressively than you'd expected. And your forecast last week reversed a lot of what you were expecting in earlier months. So, is the bank's credibility sort of up to the task?
Well, Phil, I do always make the point that our forecasts are conditional. They're conditional in the sense of, we have to condition them on, on financial market prices. We have to condition them on other policies. And then, of course, we have to adapt them for the shocks that are going on around the world around us. And as I said earlier, the shocks have been huge. So we have to make these adjustments all the time. I also made the point, you probably detected quite strong in pushing back on this idea that somehow monetary policy caused this inflation, because I'm sorry, I just do not believe that to be the case. So our job and our credibility is to bring inflation back to target. And overall, this is the biggest test of the regime, because it's by far the biggest shock to inflation. But the test for me is that we can have these things going on in the world around us, which are, are terrible and have very bad effects, and the regime can bring inflation back to target. That's the test of credibility for me.
Interesting. Right, we'll take two questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions for the Governor of the Bank of England? Yeah, I can see a hand up there, so in the middle of the room.
Hi there, it's Matt Moss here, CEO of Smart Garden Offices based in Suffolk. With businesses facing huge amounts of cost pressures with energy, taxes, employment rates going up, most of the influence around inflation is caused by external factors, global factors. How do you perceive the fact that increasing interest rates is another inflationary pressure that businesses are having to face, is another cost that we're having to bear? And when you talk about the longevity of this inflation, that's just adding more pressure and will add more longevity, and it puts a huge amount of pressure on businesses that have got existing finance where they're not perhaps then able to gain support from banking.
Thank you.
So I do understand the question, and I want to assure you that I do understand the very difficult consequences of the economic conditions and the inflation that we're facing. What I would say is this, and it somewhat continues from the previous question, that what would be a worse outcome is if we did not get the inflation under control. And I come back to this question about persistence and about second-round effects. I say consistent with my answer to the previous question. I'm afraid there's no tool that we have to make the initial shocks go away and to make the effect of these external shocks, particularly on national real income, which obviously then feeds through into the economy, comes through as inflation, go away. What we do have to do is prevent it becoming embedded. That would be a worse outcome. That's why we're raising interest rates in a sort of simple sense.
And we've got one final question from the gentleman at the front here. If we could just get a microphone to this gentleman just in this front table here.
Thanks. Rod Dowler from the Industry Forum. This may sound like a simplistic question, but is there any point in having a 2% inflation target that you very rarely, if ever, meet because of other good factors, actually? But, I mean, do you need a more complex mandate, or should you drop the 2%?
No, I think it's important that we have a simple and transparent target. When you say rarely meet, I mean, actually, we did have quite a long period when we were meeting. Funny enough, actually, the average of inflation in this country for the decade before COVID hit was almost exactly 2%. That's the average, of course. It moves up and down a bit because things are always going on. Let me say just two things on it. One, the reason we have this target is, the reason we have a target and we have price stability is because I think it's very important for all of us, whether we're businesses or whether we're households, that inflation doesn't in its own right enter into our decisions. That in a sense we can sort of say, no, I can rely on it being stable. Why 2%? I won't go on at length on this question. There is a strong argument for having a small positive number. And the reason is, people say, well, why don't you set zero? That's obviously price stability. The problem with zero is that, because I said it does obviously fluctuate, that negative inflation brings its own problems. I mean, particularly, people then tend to sort of delay taking economic activity, spending and so on, because they think, well, the price may be lower to come, and that actually can be even worse. So there's a strong logic to having a small positive number, and that's really where two comes from.
And we're just about to wrap up. Just one quick question from me, Andrew. The independence of the Bank of England is something which we consider really important in our politics, but that was actually thrown into question over the last sort of 12 months or so. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not for me to comment on the politics. What I would say, I think, is that some of the actions that we have had to take in sort of the other part of our activities, particularly on the financial sector, the financial stability. So what we had to do last autumn on the LDI problems, how we had to step in for the relatively small but nonetheless important subsidiary here of Silicon Valley Bank in March, I think it emphasises the importance of our independence, and that we take these actions and that we take them when we do. We take them rapidly, and we have the tools to do it, which is part of our independence.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was a fascinating discussion, and absolutely brilliant to have Andrew here, who's incredibly busy. So we're really grateful for his time. A warm round of applause for Andrew Bailey. Thank you so much, Andrew. It was really interesting, fascinating. Right, well, we have got another fantastic guest speaker lined up for you. Our next speaker is the global serial entrepreneur, Lindsay Boyd. Like Lindsay successfully owned and sold 2 businesses before the age of just 24. The second was a very famous, renowned footwear brand with global distribution channels across 7 different countries. Now, she sold this company to Caterpillar and then went on to build her 3rd business, working with and growing some of the most famous fashion brands on the high street. She became very famous for building the brand Famous Brands. Now, 11 years ago, she founded Purpose and moved out of the world of consumer brands to set up One Earth, which is the first purpose-led platform connecting enterprise to trade and amplifying the voices of communities to make change. She's known as a global ambassador for purpose and sustainable change. She aims to help millions of organisations and their businesses build and scale their good causes. She's a brilliant, brilliant speaker. Please give a warm welcome to Lindsay Boyd.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you to the Chambers. What an incredible talk it's been so far, hasn't it? And look, I'm not a governor, I'm not a minister, I'm not your potential next president, but I am a serial entrepreneur. I am one of you. I am here to speak to the people and to the businesses. And I've been invited to speak with you today about the purpose economy, green innovation, and growth with purpose, and how we're all playing into, potentially, the next biggest economy, the purpose economy, for the next 10 years. Now, this economy is still in design, and so can hugely be influenced. So let's have a look and see who's in this economy. Well, we talk about ESG. Many different people mention ESG. SMEs, businesses like yourselves, businesses that are looking to transition over to purpose, ESG, businesses that are already leading the charge, charities,